and Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Will Pascal, Chair of the committee. I'll be chairing tonight's meeting. This event is being streamed live on YouTube, and members of the public and media are welcome to watch the meeting remotely and listen to the discussions taking place. I would like you to welcome all those in Committee Room 1, Kensington Town Hall, and all of you watching on YouTube. Before we proceed with the meeting, I would ask members of the committee, please make sure your mobiles are set to silent and any other devices.
Excuse me, Chair, I'll be one moment. Very sorry.
I suggest we continue. I think it would be appropriate for us to start with 72 seconds of silence. Remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy.
Sorry, please do go on.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Apologies for absence. We have apologies for absence being received from Councillor Alex Porter. Are any other ones to add?
No.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. I have a small matter of interest to declare. Under the key decisions part of this meeting's papers, there's one item which refers to Lot Road. I have a business in Lots Road, and therefore I'm not prepared. I'm not proposing to make any comments on this key decision. But if any other member wishes to do so, I'll hand over chairmanship for that item to my deputy, Councillor Pretty Hard. Are there any other declarations of interest? No. Minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of March. The action tracker. I think first of all, can I ask the question, are there any matters of corrections from those of you who were present during the previous meeting? Yes. And if the action tracker covers the items from those minutes specifically, but also any previous ones, and I think they've covered the piece as far as the action to be taken. So do the committee agree to this being a correct record? I know some of you weren't here. If you agree in formal terms, that would be most useful.
Agreed.
So our first substantive paper tonight is the paper from the Strategic Directorate for Grenfell Partnerships, Communities and Transformation. An update on the delivery of Grenfell Support Programme 2024 to 2028. What I would like to emphasise is that this community, so if officers would come up and leave there as well, thank you. We take a series of papers as one of the top partners within OSC. This is the place within this is the top scrutiny committee in the council, the senior one. We take Grenfell extremely seriously, and therefore it's in this committee. The reports will come up around the year as they become available from different aspects of Grenfell, broadly speaking, broken down into two categories. One is the support direct to those directly affected by Grenfell, and the other aspect is the lessons learned from the recovery programme and the team that has been supporting it, to be applied wider across the council as been challenged, as the council has been challenged to become the best council and the most lessons. There will be some other issues which specifically are allocated to for instance, adult social care or housing committees. But broadly speaking, most of the reports come to this committee. That's just by way of background. And could I ask Tom and Callum, perhaps, if you and Joe, whether you'd like to do a short introduction? The assumption, this is our first, I won't repeat this every meeting, but the assumption at these meetings is that everybody on the committee has read all the papers and has been prepared with questions only. So,
Can I make one point before
Yeah.
we start? There was an apology for absence from Jem Kamali. I don't think we.
That was the housing committee, I think.
Okay.
okay, so Jackie, that's the housing committee, so it'll be recorded on the housing committee. Thank you. So, sorry, Tom as lead member and Callum and Joe as lead officer. Would you like to, we're assuming we've read the papers.
Yeah.
So don't.
Well, I'll just say a few words before handing over to Callum and Joe. Just to thank the committee for inviting me this evening. Just to explain very briefly my new role as lead member for modernisation and transformation includes Grenfell recovery, and I think that's in large point because we see lessons learned from Grenfell have to be at the centre of very much the centre of our modernisation and transformation as the council. So that's a large part of why it falls within my portfolio. I only, as you all know, took over the role just a couple of weeks ago, so I've been sort of coming up to speed on what the team have been doing. I've been really impressed to learn all the detail behind the work they're doing across the Grenfell recovery plan, and much of which is summarised in tonight's paper. So I look forward to being scrutinised by you on many occasions over the coming council year. But as far as this paper goes, it's predominantly, as you'd imagine, formulated before I took on the role. And in any case, Callum and Joe are really the experts on this. So I'm going to hand over to them to introduce the paper.
Great, thank you, Councillor. And nothing kind of major to add, only to say this is one of the series of regular reports that the committee gets about the progress across the three elements of the Grenfell Support Programme. This is the kind of format that we have done the reports in previously, but of course, especially with the new committee, if there are particular areas in future that the committee would like to look at in more detail, that would of course be very welcome. The scrutiny of this work by this committee sits alongside the work of the independent scrutiny function, and we have just received their latest round of reporting on this programme, which sadly wasn't available in time for the publication of these papers, but we will of course share those with the committee so you can see what the independent scrutiny function has to say about the latest round of scrutiny. And then just to your point, Councillor Pascal, we are also coming to this committee in July, to the July meeting, with an update on the Grenfell Tower inquiry commitments.
Okay. So, Richie, would you like to start off?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Chair. My overall question is, I think from the previous report, one of the from these independent scrutiny and monitoring program, I think we were told by Involve and Collab CIC that a big weakness was consultation. And I have read through the papers, and I just wondered, has the consultation participation increased since then? And I think that was in 23-24. That's what we're told. So that's one of them. On page 19, 3.2, the well-being grant. I would just like to understand that a bit more. We have missed something in your papers. It says it goes from 350 for the first year, second year 500, second for 550. And overall, I think it seems to a very, very impressive achievement. But one thing I was disappointed to read, page 26, 7.6, that the take up on the, I guess this point goes back to consultations again, is the take up on the generic satisfaction survey is still pretty limited. And I just wondered how do you plan to improve this?
Thank you. And you're absolutely right. So collaborate and involve and collaborate in their previous role as the external scrutiny team, where they scrutinised the consultation that took place in 2023 and 2024 to essentially shape this programme. And they were concerned specifically about the consultation, the reach of the consultation with the immediate community. So we had quite limited engagement, especially in the later stages of that work, and they wanted to see more people engaged through the ongoing efforts to shape the programme. I'm really pleased to say that when we did the review of the programme after the first year, so we did it about 6 months in, between August and November of last year, we considerably increased the reach of that. So I think the exact figures were in the last committee paper, but we reached over 500 people through that and had really good engagement with people telling us what they liked about the programme and what they wanted to see us do differently. And the independent scrutiny function in their verdict on that review said they were pleased to see that some of the expectation that they had set for us to increase that engagement. I think it's a good example of where you offer something that people value and that perhaps people have been missing and have wanted, that actually it's a really good opportunity to then talk to them about what's working and what's not working. We had lots of very good feedback through that review, which we've since used to shape year 2 of the programme. And on the wellbeing grant, so that's absolutely right, we have managed to increase it. So we haven't changed the budget envelope. What we have changed is the assumptions about take-up. So we knew, I think, right from the beginning, there were about 5,500 households in that 500 metres around Grenfell Tower, but those include very wealthy households who we thought may well not want to access the wellbeing grant. And so what we really didn't know at the beginning of the process is what that take-up would likely be. I think to date, for year 1, we have had about 2,600 households access that wellbeing grant. We did introduce a cut-off date for the first year, and part of that was allow us to then plan more effectively for future years, which was allow us to increase the grant to 550. We've been relatively conservative with that figure, partly to ensure that we don't then have to decrease it in future years. So we've made a commitment to the community that we will either maintain it at that rate, or indeed, if it's possible, to increase it further in years 3 and 4. And then the final point, I think, is specifically about some of the aspects of the education and training programme, where I think there have been satisfaction surveys issued in relation to kind of specific parts of the programme. What I know the team is thinking about at the moment is how they do something slightly more comprehensive, looking back over the first year of the programme, which began really in September of last year, so that they can increase some of that engagement and get a sense from people of what's working well and what's not working not so well. I think we've heard throughout this Grenfell work that sometimes, where something important is at stake and where people can see the value, they will participate in a survey, but surveys often aren't the best way to get that kind of feedback. So particularly staff working in the education hub are seeing some of that, hearing some of that feedback on a kind of day-to-day basis through the work that they're doing. So I think, as ever, the challenge is to try and make sure that we make all available use of all of the feedback that's coming with us and don't just rely on one mechanism.
So you're saying that that's going to replace the surveys, or?
Yeah, I think we
in conjunction with the surveys.
I think we have to add to the surveys other ways of seeking feedback from people and make sure we're capturing them.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Mary, would you like to?
Yes, I would. Can I ask about the community activities pilot?
Yes.
Which is on 315. Do I kind of get the sense that this is quite one of the harder bits of the whole exercise? And if so, could you sort of so, for example, there's a NOMID comment about there are different views about what kind of activities would best support residents. Could you kind of characterise that and put a bit of flesh on it for me?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is one of the challenges that we've actually had throughout the work on Grenfell, whether it's with bereavement survivors or within the immediate community, which is, on the one hand, there's a real desire to see kind of community-based activities where people can come together. On the other hand, in relation to people's recovery and the kind of support they need, one person's needs are not the same as another's, or what one person thinks would benefit them is different from what their neighbour might think. So the challenge there was a really strong appetite through the initial consultation for those kinds of activities which would bring people together, but different views about might look like. And that's partly in relation to what sorts of activities people wanted to see, how we should commission them, and who would make that decision. So I'm really pleased that we've managed to get the pilot off the ground. There's been some really fantastic take up, particularly of some of the kind of day trips that local organisations have put on. And the advantage of that, of doing a pilot, I think, is it's then given us some learning that we can then take back to, particularly to the operational steering group, to talk to them about how we build on that with the main programme. So I'm hopeful that we've moved past that impasse. And again, the review last year was a really important source of information about what people wanted. Again, it didn't all point in the same direction, but we were able to find some common themes that we built on through the pilot.
Thank you. Well, it seems to be that launching a pilot, you've stopped making the perfect the enemy of the good.
Yes.
And moved on. So that, I applaud that.
And it's worth saying that residents were expressed very clearly their frustration that it had taken so long to get something off the ground. And again, they reached the conclusion that actually it was better to try something and have something in place quickly and learn from it and iterate so that we could get something in place.
Thank you.
All right.
Yes, just actually, you stole my thunder. I was just about to ask about that. That's fine. I just wondered if you could just tell us a little bit more, because I noticed in 3.16 on page 22, it says that the budget for this is 40,000 pilot focused, and it gives examples of enhanced wellbeing, group day trips and creative activities. Now, you mentioned day trips. Can you just give us some examples of what people would like to see and what has been organised?
Yes, so we heard very clearly through both through the original consultation and through the specific review of the programme last year that people did want to see day trips. We heard clearly that people wanted kind of group wellbeing activities, and there were some suggestions about kind of arts-based and other kind of craft-based programmes. We've launched, and I'm happy to share with the committee the list of sort of 10 projects that we funded through this programme. We've advertised them quite widely with the newsletter that we now send to households in the 500 metres. They have been a real mixture, and we worked with the ward councillors to get that kind of balance right for the initial pilot. The day trips do look like they have proved to be some of the most popular, some of the most oversubscribed, and we've got some good suggestions, but there are other things, some of which have taken a little bit longer to launch, which we're only kind of seeing some of the take figures for now. So the idea really is to take and perhaps to this next iteration of this paper for the committee is to bring a bit of an update on kind of where we've seen the greatest take up, what people seem to value most, and I think that will help us make some decisions about what the longer term programme should be.
And one follow-up question, if I may, Chair. Has the cyber attack at the council adversely affected, and if so, has it added to the cost? Has it been inconvenienced, or what lessons have been learned from that?
It's certain. So I would say that we have managed to maintain the delivery of all three programmes in a way that I'm very pleased to report, in particularly in relation to bereavement survivors. We managed to maintain kind of both contact and the regular cycle of payments. The same is true from the community perspective. We found workarounds in order to be able to pay household wellbeing grants. What it probably has meant is that we've been reliant on emergency payment procedures, which are often more onerous and require more checks, understandably. And what that has meant, I think, ultimately is that we had to delay the launch of the Year 2 wellbeing grant. So we are in the process, we've paid now the vast majority, but we're in the process of making those final payments. So I would say it's caused some delays to elements of the programme, but we've managed to maintain delivery on the whole.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Linda.
I have two questions. About the reach and take up some projects. What do you think is the cause? So you're going out to a group of people. What do you think it is? What's the reason for them not responding? What do you think?
It's an excellent question, and it's one we've struggled with throughout the programme. I think in relation, particularly, take the immediate community, particularly bereavement survivors, we have kind of good take up. We're pretty confident that people are accessing the support where they want to. I think for the immediate community, historically, we had a lot of experience with people who didn't feel that the support was for them, and actually it took quite a lot of work, particularly face-to-face, and I'm really grateful for the work that the community advocacy team has done locally to kind of raise the visibility of the programme and to take the time to explain to people that actually it is for them, because I think often people held back.
Is it geographical?
Yes, people they were thinking that the support was for perhaps people who were more immediately affected or bereavement survivors. So we did quite a lot of work early on to make it clear to people that this was a programme for people living in the 500 metres. And then I think we've encountered since then some of the kind of perhaps more traditional issues around older people and more vulnerable people. We've had a lot of success with door knocking and actually kind of reaching out to people or joining events that are going on particular estates or in community settings. And again, I think the visibility of the community advocacy team has been core to that. So alongside their more kind of in-depth casework, they've done a lot of just raising awareness of the programme, particularly in kind of sheltered housing blocks and other areas where we know we've used the data about where the take-up of the programme is to drive some of that door knocking and some of that engagement.
So you've modelled some in response.
Exactly, and trying to respond to kind of where.
So my second question is, you've got a series of activities. Who's actually delivering them?
So for the community activities pilot, it is 10 local, mostly local organisations, not all in fact, and there was a decision made to make sure we didn't just restrict it to local organisations. I'm very happy to provide the list to the committee.
It's just in another committee we discussed the cuts that the council is going to have to make to some of these organisations. So are they going to be affected by these cuts? And if they are, is that in a way that you're going to be able to balance the books in order to be able to continue to deliver?
Yeah, so that I think so. This funding is ring fenced, and it will be used not necessarily for the same organisations, but to support this kind of activity. I think you're absolutely right. There is a kind of broader question about some of the challenges facing some of these organisations, although not others who are kind of thriving. This isn't kind of core funding for organisations. This is funding that is specifically designed to support a project. Exactly.
And just on your first question, Linda, one thing which has had very high take-up is in the wider community is the offering of free use of Kensington Leisure Centre. And that's been very highly valued. I don't know if you can say any more about that, Joe.
And is that for a specific age group, or is it?
No, that's a general offer, and we've got an offer for kind of children over the age of 11 and for adults. And it has been hugely popular, and I'm really pleased to see not just lots of people signing up, but actually now lots of people using it on a monthly basis, which is the bit that we pay for and are obviously most interested in from a resident perspective.
And so when you pay, is it that they can go in any day they want? It's not limited to.
It's not limited. No, they can go whenever they want. And I'm also pleased that it's an element of the offer which has, unlike a lot of the support we've put in place through previous recovery programmes, it's been quite popular with men as well. Sometimes we've struggled to reach men in the local community, and actually this is something that does have large numbers of men taking up. It has created, as we've referenced in the paper, a bit of a challenge around the sustainability of the offer because it's had such high take up, but we're looking at options now for that longer term.
Thank you.
So you're building that in?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Callum, Jen, and Tom. Well, I was very interested to read this paper because I really remember that I've been very close to all of these programmes since they began. And I don't have any questions about the dedicated service because I think that, broadly speaking, has always been very well received by bereavement survivors who are a very distinct group. But I guess the community support programmes have always been trickier. Because it's harder to find exactly who these people are. And I was interested to see that they're now defined by their distance from the tower. And I just wondered whether you thought that it could cause division to define people like this, because there might be some that live further away that feel more affected, and there might be some that are closer that are less affected. And when you're giving out grants and support for the advocacy team, some people, some residents might feel that they're getting less than they should be getting and others are getting more. And, when I had a look at the link about the reach of the community programme, I noticed that most of it's about housing management. And it just kind of made me concerned that, there might be a perception that people who are closer kind of get a more gold-plated housing service than those that are further away. And I know that can be quite MySafe actually. So I just wondered whether you had any comments on whether you've seen that, how you manage it. And then I have a second question as well about the education, but maybe start with that.
Thanks, Councillor Simon. And yes, I think that you're absolutely right. Whenever you draw a boundary, it is a kind of challenge and there's a risk of creating kind of division or exclusion. And we heard very clearly when we did the initial consultation that that was something people wanted to avoid. And on the other hand, the Global Settlement Agreement was quite prescriptive. So it said that this support had to be for people living in the immediate vicinity, and we essentially tested the kind of 500-metre boundary through that initial consultation. We did include a discretionary area, so it's not quite so black and white as that makes it sound, but I think it was important particularly for people in the immediate community who felt that their needs had often been neglected and they hadn't had the kind of focus that the previous recovery programme had focused too broadly on North Kensington as a whole. I think what I would always say is that the job of this programme, and my job, is never to say who was or wasn't affected by Grenfell, but to try and provide the kind of best possible support within the parameters. We have absolutely had some people from outside the area who feel they should be able to access it, and we've tried to deal with those complaints as kind of compassionately as we possibly can. It hasn't been huge numbers of people. There does seem to be a kind of broad consensus that it is important to focus on this group of people. I would also say that we didn't explicitly open up the question of eligibility as part of the review, but we did look back over everything we had heard from people. You're right, I think that particularly through the Grenfell Community Advocacy Team, we do hear a lot about housing management, but I think we are hearing some feedback which probably is common to people across the borough. And so one of the things we're trying to do with those reflections, the kind of work the team have done, the kind of experiences they've had working with people who sometimes fall through the cracks, is to share that learning with kind of housing colleagues and to try and make sure that that's driving some of the wider improvements. And I do think that is where there is an opportunity for this programme to drive broader change, particularly within housing. And the only other thing on the 500 metres is I should say that people are also eligible for support if they did live in the 500 metres at the time of the fire. So if they've since moved away, they can still access this programme.
You had a second question.
Yes. So this second question is about the education and training support. So I just wasn't sure if this is the Grenfell Education Fund or what was the Grenfell Education Fund. And I just found this section a little bit woolly. I just remember when we were doing the Grenfell Education Fund, we had a specific cohort and they were tracked and they had tuition, they had tutoring to make sure that they were on track. And I mean, I guess those kids are going to be quite a lot older now. I mean, obviously, it's 9 years ago. So how has that evolved? And is it the same kids or is it different kids? And what are they really getting? Advice, advocacy, and practical help? I mean, yeah, that doesn't sound as clear as tuition or, tutoring.
Thank you, Councillor. It's an evolution, so I would probably put it. So the Education Hub, again, is one of the components of the Global Settlement Agreement. The Grenfell Education Fund, as it was, I think was very helpful for people who were on it, but there wasn't a huge amount of clarity, let's say, as to why some people would be on it and why some people wouldn't. And so what we wanted to try and do was to take what was good from that, to take what was good from the support we provided to grieving survivor children, to really listen to the consultation feedback that we heard, whether you were a bereaved or survivor, or someone who lived in the community, the great area of consensus we heard was trying to ensure that all of the children were supported, were front and centre, and had the broader support available to them to ensure their horizons could be enabled rather than limited. So the way that we've structured the Education Hub is to provide individual personal discretionary budgets for bereaved survivor children. There is a fund for children who either live or go to school in that immediate area to be able to access that support. And there's a process which involves schools and specialists to be able to make sure that that's allocated fairly. There's similar arrangements for adults who want to participate in further learning for their own development. And then what we have is a team of people who provide, whether through community referrals or through school-based referrals, the support that schools need, and they co-designed it with us to ensure that children can thrive in the settings at school as well through that additional support. So it was the part of the programme that probably took the longest to develop, partly because we were trying to engage with all of the bereavement survivors, the community and the schools, and it was incredibly important that we got that right. And I think that we can provide more information in some of the ISF reports, particularly this latest one that we'll share. It goes into a lot of detail about what isn't working, what isn't working, what we can do better, and what's going well. And I think it's developing quite positively. So we'll make sure that the pay for this clearance.
And I mean, how many children are we talking about that are receiving this support?
Well, there's all of the bereavement survivor children, which is about 250, 300. It's all of and then it's every child who lives or goes to school in that immediate vicinity. Don't know you might be able to remember the numbers off the top of my head. I think it's about 2,000 or 3,000 children in total who are eligible. And I think the last time we did the maths, it was about 600 or 700 of those children who have access support in one form or the other. So it's a model that works because kids don't only have to come there. We're taking the specialism and enabling the schools to thrive as much as they can.
Thank you. Manager Reyes.
Thank you, Mr. Pascal. Yes, thank you, Joe and Callum, for this report. I'm going to go back to the dedicated service now. So on page 17, could you say some more about opting in and opting out? Because we're told that 69% have opted out. So what does it mean when someone opts out?
Thank you, Councillor.
Or stays, is it having a worker or not having a worker? Is that?
That's the number, yeah. So before we moved to this arrangement, and we had the pure dedicated service, everybody had a worker, whether you used them, whether you wanted one or not. It was our commitment. And essentially what people told us through the consultation is they wanted more control, even more control of their care, the support that they needed. And at different points, people have felt ready to be able to step away from support. So the process of opting in and opting out is literally a choice that's made annually. The first year, people could make the choice and change their minds as they went, to be able to say, I no longer feel the need for having a worker. And partly what we're really conscious about is we've been really fortunate to have a very, very stable workforce within a dedicated service. Often people have had the same worker since 2018, if not 2017. And while that's really good, it's also about how we're going to enable people to be able to live independent lives. And when some of our workers have been so entrenchedly embedded in people's really difficult moments of their lives, we wanted to create space for people to feel safe, to choose to stand separately, and with also knowing that at any point they can opt back in. So each year we monitor the opt-in and opt-out rates, and at any time you can change your mind and come back into the service. This year we've seen 12 people come back in, we've seen more people step out. And so really it's about trying to encourage gently and sensitively over multiple years of period, people to be able to see when and if they're ready to be able to operate without the support of dedicated worker in their life.
And so the personal budgets, that's working in parallel with whether but they're not connected.
They're not
connected. Two things
yeah.
Anyway. Okay.
Yeah. And we continue to survey people, we continue to get feedback. So we understand through the use of the personal budgets what people are using the support for, how they're feeling.
Yeah.
And so it's really about empowerment and giving people the freedom to be able to feel that if they don't feel the need to, they don't have to keep coming back to talk to the team.
So why, I mean, I can understand people opt out when they think I don't need this particular support anymore. So in a sense, it's positive.
Yes.
Step forward. But they can actually come back again if they feel the need to do that.
Yes. So it's instances that whether that's happened recently, sometimes it's been to do with housing. So they felt ready, they had an issue in their home, they felt they weren't able to deal with the housing team themselves, they wanted some additional support. Some of them have been to do with difficult moments in people's lives. There's a case where someone had another bereavement. There's a case where people have had marriage separation and they wanted additional support. So sometimes it's about additional challenges that have come in. And some people have come back in when they've been challenging through the compensation process and they've wanted that sort of broader emotional support. But yeah, most people, it's a positive trajectory. But the reason why we always continue to check in with people who have opted out, and while we go through quite a detailed process of checking in, they speak with the worker, they speak with one of the managers with me, is we're also really conscious that we don't want people opting out because they're unhappy. So, and that's always a concern, and that's why we'll always continue to have some form of contact.
Thank you very much.
Monica, would you like to?
Yes, please, thank you. It has been some years since I read a detailed report on Grenfell, and thank you very much. I find it very, very helpful update. Obviously, it raised a lot of questions, but don't worry, Councillor Pascal, I'm going to meet Joe separately to understand all the various committees, etc. But there were two things I wanted to raise tonight to reference how this committee scrutinises the work that's going on. And so in 231, page 18 and 232, you mention the reports of the independent scrutiny function, which was very helpful, and it did obviously mention risks and issues around payments, and then in quarter four that the risk was ongoing. So this time I did go to the link and they are there. And I just wanted to say how helpful I found the ISF reports themselves as giving me the kind of scrutiny that I was hoping that, which answered those questions. And so I did wonder whether did they need to all remain as links? Would it help scrutiny when we all get very busy that these are appendices? And first question out of that was really then, how often do we plan to have the ISF people themselves, the writers of those reports, come into the committee? I'm sure it's planned, but also I did wonder. I know I went to the link.
Can I interrupt, Monica, briefly?
Yeah, I'll just finish
I'm happy for you to ask the question, but I just want to emphasise the point that it's up to the committee to decide how often we would like the ISF to come in, or we'd like to ask them to come in. So we can have the officers' view, of course, but we also, the committee here needs to make that decision as well.
So you haven't established how often they do come yet?
Well,
So I was really asking.
This is something that's not yet been established.
Okay.
And certainly I was going to make a comment in the future, but I'm very happy for you to ask this question, please.
Well, then I'm asking it very much to the committee, but I would say, I don't know. I found whether I will always go to those links or the public will always go to those links was a question. But since I found the language and the detail of the ISF reports, I wondered if it might save officers time and us if we saw more easily the actual reports of that. And that I do believe that the ISF has come to this committee. Has this, maybe my question should be, has this committee decided how often they come?
No, not yet.
And just, if I may, Councillor Press, so absolutely they've come to the committee before. The only reason I didn't append the reports this time is because at the time of publication we didn't have the latest quarter's report from the ISF, which is now available. And I didn't want to provide you with an old ISF report when the information in this paper relates to the previous quarter. I think certainly if the committee would like the ISF to come, we can make sure all those timings are aligned, so you have a report from us and potentially separately a report from them, or as an appendix, as you suggest. But just to reassure on sharing with residents, so every time they produce a report, this hasn't happened yet, because as I say, we've just received it, but the reports themselves from the ISF are sent to all bereavement survivors, and they are sent out via email to, I think we have about 5,000 people on our email distribution list in the immediate community, and then we link to them in our kind of regular physical newsletter, which goes out to households. So we do take kind of additional steps to share that information with the community.
Sure do, thank you. And it just raised one other question for me, that they noted in quarter four no complaints, and they were very congratulatory about that. I wondered when you were setting up the concept of a midline independent function in scrutiny, had you considered that might be a difference if the independent scrutiny function is receiving the complaints and not the council programme itself?
Yes, and in fact, it was a discussion we had explicitly at the time. Although we were clear that kind of complaints themselves had to go through the council process, we agreed that people could and should raise issues directly with the ISF about the programme. So we didn't want to muddy the waters in terms of the formal complaints process, but we wanted to create an avenue for people to raise those issues directly, as indeed some people have done through direct contact with the ISF. What we also said is that we would share respecting kind of confidentiality, we would share our responses to complaints appropriately anonymised with the ISF so that they could understand, particularly, and they wanted to ensure that we were taking a restorative approach to complaints, so that we were taking on board feedback but being clear when there was something that we couldn't change, for example. So they have looked as part of their scrutiny at individual complaints to make sure that we are responding to them in the way that they expected, but people are still very much encouraged to raise issues directly with them, and they have some what they call kind of collective scrutiny sessions coming up with both community and bereavement survivors, which are an opportunity really for them to talk directly to the community about their experience of the programme so far.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just wanted to sort of return to sort of key risks identified, just following up on the comments made earlier about the importance of the Kensington Leisure Centre. And you mentioned you were exploring options for dealing with the risks that you've identified in paragraph 51. Can you flesh that out a little bit? I appreciate you might be at an early stage, but anything you could sort of,
Yeah, so what we're waiting for really is the kind of first quarter, so that we extended the leisure centre memberships from they were due to expire at the end of March, and that we've extended them for another year, and we're waiting for the first quarter of data really to look at kind of what the take-up's been, what that means in terms of cost. We have also negotiated already some additional public health funding for this financial year, so we have secured a bit more funding. We've also separately agreed with the community through the review last year that we will repurpose the communications and engagement budget to support that, because we were actually found we were able within the admin costs to meet some of the costs of sending out newsletters. I think in terms of future options, we did say as part of the review last year that we would need to look at other sources of funding potentially. There is the underspend on the wellbeing grants, but there is also interest accruing on the contributions through the Global Settlement Agreement, which we haven't yet had a conversation with the community about how to use. So there is some option to use that funding. But what we intend to do in a couple of months' time, once we have that data in the first quarter, is to go out and give people some of those options. And some of those options might be actually people now feel that the offer is costing too much and isn't value for money. On the other hand, we can proactively suggest some ways that might be funded in the future. But I think it raises a broader point, which is really how valuable this is to people, and it raises some of those issues about kind of barriers, accessibility, affordability that the leisure centre has for people living in the community.
But yeah, barriers and impact, I think. So impact is going to be incredibly important. So although the programme will run through until 2028, we're already thinking about what happens post 2028, thinking about how can we ensure that we achieve our broader goal of achieving change through this programme, which is what the community want to see. They don't want it to be a sort of short-term process of benefit that then fades away. And I think both in terms of the leisure centre memberships, in terms of thinking about what broader wellbeing it has, we will clearly be able to do a compare and contrast to what broader benefits it achieves for residents, what impact that has in terms of a sense of early intervention, and that plus the work that we're doing in the education hub in terms of what it means for broader demand on the HCPs and everything else. I think the two areas where we believe we're exploring something that could become an opportunity for further change.
Thank you very much. Councillor Porsche, I understand that you'd like to raise a question.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair.
Are you happy to be there? Or?
No, I'm fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm fine. on page 20, paragraph 3.6, it states that young men and boys, they're underrepresented. And I'd just like to know what analysis has been taken to understand why younger people or men remain underrepresented. So that's one of my questions. And I would like to, for Callum to elaborate more on the program. And you said that it ends in 2028. What planning is on the way to ensure that service is not suddenly ended with vulnerable residents? So I would like you to elaborate on that, please. Thank you.
Yeah. So just dealing with that second one first. Planning really becomes a process of working out what residents are valuing, what they're receiving, and what we feel people would benefit from a further perspective. So all of our communications, all of our contact with our residents, whether bereavement survivors or the immediate community, has always been clear. It's a programme that lasts as long as it lasts through until we get to the end. And I think where we're trying to show evolution in the same way that we did from the recovery programme, which lasted from 2019 to 2024, this from 24 to 28, and this onwards, the key things that we'll be looking at are what further very Grenfell specific impacts continue to challenge the community, whether bereaved survivors or the immediate community. And obviously we'll be, who knows where we'll be in terms of the criminal process, who knows where we'll be in terms of the development of the memorial, being obvious ones that we'll need to be bearing in mind. So it will be a process of reviewing those challenges, reviewing what's worked through the programme and where we think it can achieve broader benefit, and then triangulating those two things together. I think we're still 2 years out really, so early-ish days, but I think we'd be keen to bring something back in the appropriate times.
Just to add to that, Callum, the other part of that is the amount of funding available. And firstly, we won't be sure until close to the time what external sources of funding we get, be that from the government, be that from some companies, be that from the outcome of legal processes, and even with our own council finances until closer to the time. It'll be close to time before we're able to commit to a certain number once we know what the other funding sources are. So we'll start planning this year, but we can't really firm it up until closer to the date for those funding reasons.
Thanks. And Councillor Claxton, just and lastly on that, I think we have the programmes all have slightly different timescales attached to them, but they also all have, I think, they raise slightly different questions in terms of the transition and what we'll need to think about. It's really positive, for example, that the education and training programme is led by somebody who, has one foot in the Grenfell Partnerships world, but one foot in children's as well. So she's trying to make sure that some of that practice and some of that learning is influencing the wider work they do. Just on your point about demographics, so interestingly, that is about the lead applicant for the household wellbeing grant. Sometimes I think that that is because women tend to be more organised in their household to get the application in, to sort things out. So it doesn't necessarily mean that kind of men and boys aren't benefiting from it. I'm really pleased to see that through the leisure centre memberships, we are getting much better take up among young men and boys, and that we will be looking at the community activities pilot to try and understand kind of whether that is reaching kind of roughly proportionate numbers of men and women. And I will look again at the Grenfell Community Advocacy Team figures, because I think those suggest that we are reaching both men and women in roughly equal measure. But I think it would be a really good thing to bring to the next committee, just a kind of a slightly more granular understanding of the different elements of it.
Guys, I would ask for you to dissect and to look into it, because men, we need to reach them, because they're a population that's been really suffering, as well as the young people. You know what's been happening in Nottingdale in the last couple of months. And I don't have the evidence, but I know that these children, and some of them that are involved in certain things, were students of KAA and the surrounding areas. Now they're grown adults, they're in their 20s, and I think that needs to be looked into.
Thank you very much. So at the end of the questions, I think the two questions I was going to ask have been roughly covered. So maybe I should just move into some sort of summary initially. I think what's true to say is that we as a new committee are in a stage of catch up to this year, and some of the processes, I'd like to pay tribute to Jackie and her team, an impossible timeframe over the last couple of weeks to get to the point we are now. And in an ideal world, they would have had at least another week, if not another 2 weeks, to have done the planning. So thank you for that. The next thing I wanted to say is that on the links, there's a balance here between convenience, because some people are much more IT driven than others. And some people prefer to read on screen and prefer reports to be bang up to date, as Joe was stating. Because by the publication date, paper versions wouldn't have been ready. So I think that it's true to say that we wouldn't have had as much information, albeit links don't always work. They don't always work on every machine. Some of the tech goes down. You have power failures, all the usual sort of domestic issues when reading these things. So I think it's something that we should consider, having more in the way of appendices where the information is available in due time for circulation and paper form to those. But I wouldn't want to stop up-to-date information, or maybe more wider, because another factor is that today's papers are fairly modest compared to some scrutiny and general papers in the council, let alone the NHS, which is always double the size. That we're about half an inch today, and if we had the links in, it's probably about 2 or 3 inches in paper. So I think a balance needs to be struck, but I think it's a very useful question back to Jackie and the team and to officers she's working with. It's really probably a question of horses for courses. Sorry, Peter, you want?
And it's sort of moving away slightly from the practicalities of whether one reads on screen or in paper. I'm thinking more in terms of what is required of us, the statutory record keeping. Because obviously links are live, and you could follow a link through. That's fine, but obviously that content isn't static. We wouldn't want it to be static; we want it to be updated.
Yeah.
But obviously, we have a statutory responsibility to have records of what papers prepared for repeating, and therefore the question is not whether or not we want to avoid sort of inches of paper; it's whether it will be a official record.
I take the government's point, and I'm sure that the government's officers can make sure that whatever is in the link is recorded physically or as necessary within an electronic context. I know the due diligence on this area you mentioned is a moving feast. And the requirements to keep physical records as opposed to electronic records. And a live link that is broken is no longer a live electronic record. And I do take the things that perhaps Jackie you could pick up.
I've made a note.
And Councillor Pascoe, just for the avoidance of doubt, had the ISF reports been available, they absolutely would have been appendices to this report. But I didn't think including old reports was particularly helpful. So I think we'll just make sure. And indeed, originally I think we were going to come to this committee in July where we would have had them.
Yes.
But so they weren't quite ready. But I think we can make sure that for the next report we align those cycles so that they are.
So if we learn, in the context of learning, if we learn between this committee and the next committee, I think for us to do it. So, coming back to the ISF, I'm very keen to engage the ISF in the most appropriate way. I think it would be wrong to have a mantra that we invite them to every meeting, but maybe there needs to be some kind of conversation between myself and Bob on your behalf through officers and in consultation with Tom and also Callum and Joe, as to what would be inappropriate. I mean, I would have thought the very minimum we ought to inviting them if they wish to come. Of course, they may not wish to come, but if they would kindly respond, I would have thought a very minimum would be at least once a year, so that we get an update on their view in an overall sense. Whether we want them because they're doing quarterly reports, whether we want them or they would want to come and see us every time. If there's a very significant event that happens within the reporting, then I think that also might be another trigger. So again, we need to learn what would be an appropriate question to ask them, and then they'll answer in their own independent way as well. But I would certainly looking forward to the Quarter 4 report, into the report itself, but also the officer's response to that. Because I think that's the key thing is what ISF 4 picks up, and then how our officers respond. Because it's supposed to be a reinforcing scrutiny loop that enlarges what we do in this committee. So that's that one. I think that the question was partly answered. Maybe I could reinforce the question about the 2028 planning beyond. I would be very good if you could come back in July and give us some idea as to when you would be able to answer certain questions in that respect. I understand this is an evolving feast, but it is a question, involving peace, but it is a question of when you're ready to do. So we got some, so we can plan time for you to come and talk to us about these things at a later date. Then I think it would be very useful. So I think that maybe I could make that into a recommendation if the committee is happy that we ask officers and lead member to respond in July with the best view going forward to when they'll be able to give a response on the post 28 and the other issues time planning. The other thing that I think would be very useful as a recommendation would be that we have a note in the transformation work that Callum and his team are doing as to where lessons have been learned and have found to be useful, and to where there's evidence of them being useful in terms of the learnings from Grenfell. One of the things purely on a business operational basis, the way in which they worked in a multidisciplinary, holistic way, backed up with IT and data, strikes me as something that the council could learn well from in a whole number of other spheres. Now, as Callum works his way into transforming and working with the business groups in those areas, an explicit question would be, where is the evidence coming from Grenfell and what effect that's had? I think my guess is that it will be enormous, but that's got to be proven by what happens. But I'd like to ask the committee to support a recommendation that we ask officers, Callum and his team, to A, investigate that, and B, report back. Are we happy about that? Yeah. Okay. Well, it's been a very interesting discussion, and thank you everybody, and thank you to Callum and Joe for all the hard work that you and your teams do. Please, I know there are others who've been involved, so please give our thanks. And Tom, welcome to this subject area, and look forward to seeing you. So thank you very much. Now, the next task we have is to look at our agenda item 5, which is the work programme. Now, we did have a pre-meet on this, which not everybody attended. We found it very useful, and also I was somewhat daunted by the length of the long list that we had. I tried, with Jackie's help, to do a little bit of simplifying of the process. You've just been handed tonight at the table a piece of 3 sheets of paper called Long List Table 1. Now, if I can explain what that is exactly the same list as is in the published papers, except for the fact that all those things that are currently agenda planned have been taken out. Because the purpose of today's meeting, agenda item, is not to debate the issues, but to decide on which ones we definitely want in, definitely not interested in, or those we'd like to do if we have capacity in terms of space in the year. And that's in bearing in mind the time we have this evening, because it covers the whole gamut of what we're going to do over the years. There's no way we're going to be able to discuss the subjects. It's more a question of deciding what's on the list. The purpose of this thing today is to get a sense, not a final decision, but a sense of what we want on the list. There will be still some confusion out of this, I'm sure. And therefore, Jackie and I will take away a sense of this meeting. We'll try to rationalise it even further and come back to a proposal, which will circulate to you, which will come published paper for the next meeting, where we will make a final decision on the current view of what the work programme is, and leave space for other items to come up during the year. And no doubt, as the year progresses, some things will become more important, some things may either be answered or seem to be less important in relation to others. So there has to be flexibility, but the officers need some sense of direction from us, so that they can engage with the officer teams and the various directorates. And then there will be some responses, and there may well be responses which say, well, actually, this is such a specialist topic, it's better suited to one of the select committees or something. So it'll be a continuous process of refinement. With that in mind, I propose to go through this short 3-page paper rather than the whole paper, come back to the decisions and such like later. But the short list I've already introduced the concept that Grenfell will be represented by more than one paper during the year, and we will be informed as it becomes appropriate and as things happen, and so on. So I propose that these topics are itemized as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in simple terms down the left. I propose to go through, and I would say one Grenfell is definitely in. I wouldn't expect there to be an intersection on that. Is everybody happy with that?
Agreed.
Number 2 is there's a little bit of complexity here. We have to decide, I think, two things. First of all, whether we haven't for some time had the borough fire commander to come and see us, and the question here is as to whether we would like the borough commander to come and see us this year and to explain progress he's made in the light of obviously Grenfell, but in the light of changes in regulation, the application of those, and the changing preparedness of the London Fire Brigade in response to various feedback that they've had over the time past. So that would be one part. The other part is to do with the police commander, which is a statutory arrangement for us to have him or her to come and see us once a year. Combined with, do we just want to have a straightforward paper and presentation and scrutiny in the normal way in this committee meeting, or would we wish to have an additional capacity as we've done in the past in the review and scrutiny, is to run a specialist meeting or conference or one day in-depth scrutiny to tackle the subject, particularly one that's, happy capacity about others, but one that's come to me more often than any other from my residents, but also other ones, which is the ability of the community to work closely with the police on the subject of antisocial behaviour, which is a very broad subject of antisocial behaviour. But there seems to be a perception that there is more that can be done in that area. And whether that is true or not, I don't know. But resource constraints on police and also on the council. But one of the suggestions that was made to Jackie is that we might want representation from local safe neighbourhoods teams, for instance, in the wards. And I know some of the wards are grouped together into area safe neighbourhoods team. And another component might be to invite. You were saying the youth council.
I went to the youth council to give them some training on scrutiny governance, and the young people there were very interested when I was explaining scrutiny that borough commander comes on an annual basis to this committee. Said, would I let them know when she comes, and they would like to come along.
Can I just say, I wouldn't combine it with the fire commander. I think
it's being brought up under the same number.
Okay, but I think they're separate things, yes. And I think
agree.
Yeah, broaden it and invite people in. That's what I would say.
Monica and Peter, would you like to comment on?
I would definitely agree with separating them.
Yeah, okay.
Because I think there are some wider issues around the fire commander, not just what they are doing, but how the borough is also recording possible emergencies and cladding, etc. So I think there's a lot there, and I do agree that the policing one, it would be good to have some inputs from the panels and other people. That would be a more public one about how we can all work better together. So I think they're two different subject areas.
Okay, well, so I think a borough commander in the context of, shall we call it resilience? Is that the best way? Stuart, perhaps you could advise us on words. I don't know, but is that the...
Yeah, I think that would be fine in that context. I mean, the key thing is that we speak to fire commander.
Right. Okay. So we invite the fire commander. Now that would be the context of that, which I understand it everybody is that would be a paper prepared, and the attendance of the fire commander and scrutiny in the normal way in one of our normal meetings. Now the question then arises with regard to the police commander as to whether that's what we want to do as well, or whether we want a broader meeting, which maybe what we could do would be to invite the police commander to come in, say, September, which would be a fairly normal timing, I think, isn't it?
Do you have to do the scrutiny once a year?
Right.
It's an annual scrutiny, that's a statutory requirement.
So that's the statutory requirement. And then at that meeting, maybe we ask the question as to whether there's a place for a broader meeting of some sort involving a formal invitation to youth and to say neighbourhood groupings or whatever the appropriate groupings are. Maybe make that with time to prepare it would be after the sort of budgets stuff in January and February, and put it through to the spring. We give time for officers to prepare something like that. So it's not going to be easy to prepare it. So shall we, if you were to agree to those suggestions, I would give them to Jackie to refine in consultation with officers and come back to us with the proposal.
Ask a question, Chair. I imagine the Borough Fire Commander wouldn't be a whole meeting, would it?
No,
Because we do have 2
no,
hours.
it'd be one paper.
It would just be one page.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. So
So with Borough Fire Commander, fairly traditional scrutiny requirement, paper and scrutiny at a meeting with 1 of 3 papers. The police one, invite him for September, do the statutory stuff, and as part of that, ask the question on a broader meeting later in the year. Okay. So number 3, annual resilience report. That's already timetabled, is it, for March?
Yeah, that would be when it's published.
Right. Okay. So that one goes in. Now, I would like to apologise for not having done before this was written up enough research to feed in to Jackie. What this is on me to put pretty helpful. I'm well aware as a hospital trust governor that there is a massive reorganisation happening in the area of North London, North West London. So there's a putting together of it's 2 areas that combined have about 4.5 million people living there. So it's a massive section of London. The integrated care system, as it's called, has gone through convolution, over the last couple of years. It's been defenestrated in terms of its funding, and its role has changed. It's become far more of a strategic authority rather than a commission authority. It's also changed its personnel dramatically, and a lot of corporate memory has been lost. However, it is now up and running in a new model, we are assured. Under it, the hospital trusts have been regrouping into larger groups and making big investments in acute care in some cases. And then at the third level, which is put forward, is the integrated neighbourhood teams, which is a way of describing the NHS's view of the wide range of normal provision services or general provision services that they give through GPs and a whole wide range of different services. It's that level of the operation, which I think at the moment is all the statements about it having separate budget. There's not a lot of detailed information available. Now, one of the other components of what question I was trying to ask, how we would scrutinise, was talking to Sarah Newman, who's the Executive Director of Westminster and Kensington Chelsea on FCS, and to her colleague Bernie on the ASC. And one of the things that they decided that they want to do is to map the way in which the various services that they and the partners that they work with, like parts of the NHS, operate physically on the ground through buildings of different sorts, or parts of buildings, or in buildings parts of the time sometimes, or in conjunction with others like schools and so on across the borough. And their supposition at the moment is that it's a bit of a mess, because some of them being put in place by one organisation and another by another organisation. By some rationalisation of the mapping of those, that there could be better services available, more holistic services available to residents, and also the economies in terms of the numbers of buildings they're operating. There already have been examples. The movement of smart from the Tara area of Chelsea to the Violet Melchett And the purchase the council made of an NHS building in North London, but also North Kensington, are examples of where either property swaps or property disposals or purchases can bring services together and make them more holistic, etc. Now, what I propose is that rather than having a separate line of inquiry for this committee, that we ask Callan and his team, when they're talking with adult social care and family and children's services, to consider that mapping exercise as a tool to give him opportunities to propose rationalizations with them working together. Now, how well that happens and how fast that happens, that's up to officers to advise us on. When they've got something to say, I think we should be scrutinising that. The relationship that the council has with the NHS, prime responsibility of scrutiny has been with adult social care, in other words, and Sarah's sharing that committee. And I agreed with Anne when we discussed this at length over the weekend, that responsibility and that focus should stay with Anne. Now, if Anne requires or wishes to have an escalation to OSC to get some more firepower behind it, if that's what seemed to be helpful, then of course the door will be open for OSC. But at the moment, the responsibility for looking at the relationship between the council and the NHS should remain in the Adult Social Care Select Committee. Should not propose a change, which is implied in under item 4 here. So there's two parts to this. One is a transformation program element, and the other part is the responsibility of looking at the NHS. So if you're all happy with that division, I suggest that's the way it's written out after this meeting. Will alter this thing. I make no apology for the fact that number 5 is called transformation. I think it should have IT and maybe AI added to it. And I'm afraid, Callum, a lot of what follows is we're going to put an awful lot of things first review in your bucket. You may wish to allocate or delegate them elsewhere afterwards, but from the scrutiny point of view, we're going to come to you first for advice on how your lens looks at these things. So under 6, which is the implementation of the LGA's corporate care planning, without your review as to how that applies to transformations, whether it's relevant or good advice from the LGA, we rely on you to advise us accordingly. Now, it may be just very obvious to you that some of it is and some of it isn't, but taken at face value, I think that having your testing of it first before we look at it directly is a better way. This transformation and becoming the best council has got to take on board all these things. What level and what speed and how is very much for the future, but I think we need your coordination of these things first. I think the reviewing of performance quarterly is something we do any case, but again, it will have the transformation will have an input to that. If anybody wants to stop me, by the way, please. I've looked hard at this and I've got my answers and I'm proposing them. But if you think you disagree, please say. But we'll be here all night to be discussing. So the finance and budgets, the zero-based budgeting project, I think was very useful at the time. It came up with some answers, some supplementary questions on the basis of what happens if you don't spend money on something that is, or a program which is not statutory, that turns out to have the consequence of increasing demand for statutory services. There are instances in children's services, for instance, where if you don't spend £200 on, between £200 and £1,000 on oracy training or early support, that you could land up with having a much bigger problem.
A memory lapse. I don't remember that we ever started this project. Did we?
We did some research and we talked to a couple of people. You were leading on it for the committee, and just talked to some people about how we might do it, and we identified a service that had to go on pause, if you remember. at the
Yes,
time.
so we didn't actually form the working group, we just did the kind of
We did
initial.
all the background work,
Yes.
preliminary work, and that's why it was agreed by the committee at the last meeting. There'll be discussion tonight about whether to unfold it or something like that. Yeah.
So you're proposing that we do start again?
Well, I'm very happy to listen to what everybody else has to say. I mean, I thought it was potentially a worthwhile project. There wasn't a great deal of enthusiasm for it amongst officers because of the work involved at the time. But
Are we not having a project working group?
Yes.
this is a separate, very specialised thing. But I mean, Maxine and Lisa.
Maxine, would you like to say something?
Budgeting is actually.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm sorry to come into the debate. I just thought it might be helpful to say that. I think that probably can be folded in with some of the transformation items. In that, one of the first things that we're doing in this year's kind of transformation programme is doing a cost-based analysis of every single budget line and service with finance colleagues. So we can bring that to you as part of that. Without it, it's not the exact same methodology as zero-based budgeting, but it's something that we've tested, procured, and it's kind of been seen as best in class of that type of approach. So we'd be more than happy to share it, but I suggest it forms part of the transformation.
I totally agree, and I think we just need to be careful. My cautionary tale is that early years case in school, I'm account that £2,000 of discretionary early intervention from NHS funding, which had fought for hard by the earliest teacher, ended up, in her view, her professional view, in changing that child's course away from a lifetime dependency on care and living secure accommodation, which her estimate minimum was 50,000 a year for the rest of that child's life, adult life. Now, that's one case, but I think it's cautionary that when we look at zero-based budgets, it's too easy if we just go through the accountancy spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So that's all I want to say. So we've taken as part of Alan will have a look at it and come back and advise us on how we might help that.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, if you draw out the sort of cost-based analysis approach what I think is really useful is to have a look in detail at one service area. And we have chosen a particularly discrete one. But I'm very happy to suggest others, but we had identified one. But we just need to, when we look at budgets, we need a bit of depth sometimes as well to really get to grips with what's happening.
Could you explain what zero-based budgeting is?
Well,
because I don't know what
the way it was expressed at the time, it's not the only definition, there are a whole range of definitions. But the way it was expressed at the time is basically that if we did statutory services only, what would it cost?
No. I think it's slightly different to that. It's if you look at a service and what it has to do, and you forget you've got any staff or any activity, how would you start from zero to build up a budget to address those needs and those activities, which often gives you surprising insights into what you're doing a lot of and maybe needn't do, and what you're not doing enough of. If you start from that right, so that was the approach. We'd chosen a little of housing needs as a place to start because it's quite discreet. Because often things blend into one another and it's very difficult to do. But I know it's very staff intensive, so I'd be satisfied to look at the way you describe and see how that works. And if we think it doesn't work, we can go back to next year to looking at zero-based budget.
I think we just illustrated that we've got more than one view about what's on. But anyway, if we take your guidance in the first instance, and if you come back, either formally or informally, to start with on guidance about this, and we can progress it as a conversation. So moving on to number 9, corporate policies and services. My view was that item is something we do the whole time. It's meet and drink at the of the scrutiny in OSC and select committees. So the answer is yes, but not an item on the programme. Item 10 is a repeat of the one above. Item 11, DT&T, and 12 and 13, reviewing programme of the IT estate and renewing progress managing data breach and notification resident I think that's is in essence in the transformation programme already. So if that, when appropriate, you'll give us reports back on those items.
There's an IT report coming to the July meeting.
Yeah, I think definitely parts of it, particularly the future look, I think definitely overlaps in terms of how we'll deliver any of the transformation work. I think we can wrap it all together, but you might end up with a really long report if we also are talking about cyber recovery and the risks associated there. So, yeah.
And no worries about it being divided into headings as long as it all adds up to the same objectives. That's the
yeah. I think the cyber attack and the management of it and the notification and the breach is slightly different because it's getting us to foundational operating levels and dealing with backlogs and showing the pain points that we've experienced. So that will speak to a different agenda. But the rest of the IT development absolutely aligns with transformation.
Thank you. 14, which is public participation comments, as it was put. I was confused as to whether this should be purely linked into housing communities with escalation as required, or whether we wanted something broader across the whole council range. So
again, I don't quite understand what that's about.
So there's going to be an annual report of the public participation commitments. That was previously the Charter of Public Participation.
Right.
So the previous committee had a briefing from officers as part of developing the commitments at an early stage. So it's whether the annual report is reviewed at a meeting. So this is a crossover with housing and communities, because housing and communities leads on consultation. But the public participation commitments are part of constitution. This committee is responsible for governance, and also they cross over all services.
But Jackie, you've just effectively described a splitting up of the annual report on the progress of the Charter of Public Participation commitments. One hand, which should come to this committee, and then the other elements, which should be part of housing and communities.
Housing and community is the lead committee for consultation, and they did a working group. Which
do you have any views to whether it should be here or entirely in your committee? I don't really mind. I think the annual response to the commitments we've made to the Charter of Public Participation as a council should come at some form to this committee.
I agree.
And then what would you like to keep in your committee?
Well, nothing in that we have already done quite a substantial piece on consultation.
When was that? This year.
This year. So you're due to get the response to recommendations either at the next meeting of housing or the one after.
Yeah.
Right.
So in that sense, we already have it.
So you've done your job for this year, or will have done over the next couple of months, and then the other commitment comes as
I mean, the way I look at it is, it's not that I don't want to revisit consultation, but there's so many other things that you have to fit in that we can't do the hostels again.
No, Therese, what you're saying effectively is, since you will have done over the next couple of months that job for this year,
yes,
the next time you want to do it is at least a year's time.
Yeah, I think so. And then
the cycle for the OS committee is on the public, the Charter of Public Participation commitments for annual report. And when was the last one of those?
Well, it hasn't been one because they've just been developed. Right. So it would probably be, well, it would be next year if you wanted to put that on your work programme.
So when you say next year, you mean
March.
Okay, well, if we put it thus, that we note that what Marie-Therese has said has happened in our committee for this year, and if you wish to mark it out in a year's time, then that's next year's committee. And then the other thing is that in the spring we will get a report on the we plan to have a Charter of Public Participation commitments action.
The particular point about the possible working party, given the fact that housing did that, also the council did that, it's actually
what has happened to the recommendations and have the recommendations been implemented? I mean, I'm just concerned that sometimes you have quite a lot of work going into a report, comes up with recommendations, but there doesn't seem to be the ability to ensure that some of the recommendations.
Well,
so, shall I explain the procedure for recommendations?
Yes,
If that helps. So, when the committees are referred, the recommendations are referred to the decision maker. There's a statutory requirement to respond within 2 months to say whether they've been accepted, part accepted, or rejected. And those responses are put into a report to the committee, either a separate report or the work programme report. And my team has been supporting councillors to make sure that we get those responses back, and we do take up on that, and we are getting responses back. So they will be due back to housing, as I say, either this meeting or the one after.
Okay. Does that cover the piece on this one? Are we happy we have a way forward?
So just to add, could you make sure that Linda's copied in when it's going to come so she can attend the meeting?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay. The next one is economy plan refresh. Now, I don't know whether Maxine, you give us a bit of advice on this, but as I understand it, that the process is beginning to happen with officers. So, what is exactly meant by an economy plan? At the moment, it's linked into ESC, as I understand it, and it's largely in relation to bids. There is also an element which is to do with adult learning or learning to help people in FCS to get to the point at which they can gain employment. And there's a special extension to the age group without an SEN. But it may well be that what Mara is looking at or going to look at is broader than that. And if it is, and incorporates, how we're going to help the culture economy grow in a broader sense, and such things, or how we're going to help the manufacturing sector to grow, or the food sector to grow, or whatever it happens to be. That if we're going to go bigger time into economic development with partners presumably, that would be a broader programme than is currently being engaged in. So where exactly it should sit depends on the answer to that, and also the timing of that. So what I propose is that we leave it where it is for the moment. We ask Jackie to work with Mara and to come back to us with a programme as to when the leadership team will be making decisions as to the direction of travel, and obviously some transformational elements in that. And once we get a steer from that, we can then see whether and when it would be better. It would be good to have a broader scrutiny of that process in OSC. Does that make sense, that we stick with the existing system at the moment until we get new information?
So there's some information on page 36.
Right.
But just to remind the committee, if it's helpful, about the statutory guidelines, there's lots and lots of things that you could scrutinise. So you have to do the statutory stuff, the planning disorder that we've just discussed. The council's made a commitment to Grenfell, so you must do that here. But there's lots of suggestions that you will get, and you will have to prioritise. And there are some important things that you just won't have time to do, as you can't do everything in statutory guidance. It's clear on that. So in looking at all the officer suggestions, you should prioritise and decide what you got time to do in this committee.
And I think, as seen at the moment, it should stick with the ESC as a result.
Well, this one, the economy plan's in the terms of reference for this committee, but just because it is, doesn't mean that you have to scrutinise it if you feel that you haven't got capacity as a committee.
But one of the benefits of bids working well is they get businesses to engage in some of the processes that we're currently paying for out of council tax and other income, that help deal with such things as antisocial behaviour by the way in which they engage with the local community, not only the business community, but the resident community as well. And if bids start evolving into bids plus SIDS, which is a community interest district, and those thoughts are beginning to happen in the existing bid areas, and if we, through the transformation of the council, actually change the direction and of the way in which things are financed, the responsibilities and opportunities can shift as well. And therefore, how to deal with antisocial behaviour, cost of that may well be possible, be dealt with partly by financing from the business sector as well as from the council sector. If that sort of shift happens, the questioners should be asked as to whether it can happen. And I think there's not enough evidence yet to say which it will be. And I agree with you, at the moment we don't have the evidence to put it firmly on the programme. But I think from what I've seen on the ground across the borough, that there are sufficient shifts happening, and they're going to have to happen in the heat and light of the financial changes that we're going through. But if those things happen, then I think it's something that should come to OSC. It may not be for another year. It may not be possible to put it into this year's programme. But I do think we need to keep the door open to new thinking in that respect. So my suggestion is, just for the committee to agree or disagree with, is that we keep it in the SC at the moment, and we ask Maxine, Callum and officers to inform us if they see things changing and they think it's more appropriate that we should take a wider view and do it through OSC. Because I suspect some of what we see now is coloured by the evidence we have now, and our learnings as a new community, as a new committee, will change as we're informed by the transformation feedback. So could I propose that we keep the economic plan refresh in ESC for the moment? We ask Jackie to talk to Moira particularly, and to look at time frame of possible change. And if that is fulfilled, we readdress the question as to whether this is something that should come to OSC. Are we happy with that? In which case I shall move on to employment skills performance reporting.
Chairman, I'm keen for us in our Family and Children's Services to have a report on NEETs, not an employment educational training. I'm not sure that my committee will accept, I can't promise that my committee will accept that, but that will be one of my main recommendations for reports. I think possibly you can leave that one to us.
Could I ask you to ask your committee as to whether they propose this following question as well, as to whether the existing curriculum or extended as defined by the government actually equip our children for the real work.
I've heard you say that before. She'll certainly mention it.
I think what we're getting into here is we can't have OSC bettering the other select committees as to what they can and cannot do. And I think, you know, things which are raised which are of interest, yes, you can take them to committee, but the committee might not want to do it.
I did ask her to ask the committee.
Okay.
Right. If they say no, they say no. Fair enough. The next one is strategic procurement report. I think procurement's a very interesting and important subject in its own right. However,
I think that should just be with transformation.
Just with transformations. And similarly, the procurement reviews and procurement of revenues and benefit system, I would say that's a case study within the overall strategic procurement. And therefore, it should also be considered in the lens of transformation. Again, it's not a question that we require a report, Callum, it's just a question that that's in your area to advise us on what's.
I think David Hughes is David Hughes put forward the strategic procurement update and said it would be good to do that if we wanted to take it in March. I don't know what the timeline is for the procurement of revenue benefit systems. They might not fit together.
But the question is,
Lisa's got a hand up, she might know.
Sorry, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you. So the revenues and benefits system, we haven't started the procurement yet. We can certainly do an update of the latter part of this financial year. It'll take 18 months probably to procure it fully. It's very complex. So I'm happy to bring back as part of a procurement update, quick update. Or the other thing we can do is wrap it into the financial monitoring reports, which obviously are not on here because they're already in the forward plan.
I think the latter would probably be better unless there's going to be a big change of direction. I mean, if, for instance, as a result of the transformation exercise and the decisions by the leadership team, the decision to radically change the way we do stuff, then that ups the necessity for us to scrutinise it.
I reckon it's the quarterly monitoring reports. There's already a section in there.
Thank you very much. That's very good. Okay, so Maxilla, I think is squarely in the lens of this committee. Exactly what happens next on Maxilla and what we should be asking in the way of scrutiny questions, I'm not sure, because it's the only thing that has happened, as I understand it, is adult social care is no longer part of the picture. What else is part of the picture, and how? It's probably one of the longest standing items in my career in the council, and therefore it's an important one for scrutiny to keep on the agenda. Who can come back to us, Maxine, in terms of advising us?
Well, I hate to make that to say that, but it is actually Callum's area, whereas revenue and benefits isn't, that's Lisa, but the property and communities area sits under Callum. So.
Right, well, Callum, if you want to say something now, fine, but if you want to take it away and have a think about how you want to answer the question, but the question is, when should we scrutinise the next steps on Maxilla?
I'll come back to speaking to the team. So yeah, a lot of work's going on at the moment, just to try and work through some of the intricacies of some of the other properties and positions, and trying to work through relationships with the CLC. So, but it's entirely appropriate that it's a focus area. It's been flashing red for too long enough before we come.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much for taking that on board. And the next one is the Notting Hill Heat Network. Now, I did a bit of, I talked to Mary briefly, and we are of the same memory that basically for a number of reasons that was escalated to OSC some time ago. But on reconsideration, certainly I've talked to Mary, I talked to Mary-Therese, and I've talked to Jem Kamani, who's the new lead member on this. And we're all of the view that it now should go back to housing community. This is closely linked into not only Lancaster West, but it's also just linked into potential use in other areas of refurbishment of housing estates. So it's an implementation exercise now, and should be considered alongside the implementation of the housing refurbishment of estates. Monica, now.
Just a question, I don't know the answer at all. But didn't it arise out of Grenfell recovery? It was a pilot around improved 21st century heating in social housing. And so it was piloted there. So if that is what it was, then has the learning been done before it becomes a technical thing in housing? Isn't that why it was held with OSC? And has that all been completed then?
Because my memory was that the business model that was set up to do it was somewhat complex and unusual, and that some of the partners who were envisaged to participate in it walked away from the project, and therefore it's reverted back much more to being a heating system for housing. And there are a number of other new technologies as well, like heat pumps, air source and ground source heat pumps, etc. And we wouldn't escalate ground source heat pumps as has been used by Clarion in the Sutton estate north of St Louis, which is probably the best implementation of any heating system I've seen anywhere.
That's the technical, but wasn't it in part of the Grenfell aim to give housing a 21st century safe? And so I'm asking, has that process finished? If
we're going to take that lens on things, I would say that what Clarion's done in Sutton Willings is an example that we should be looking at as well. So
if I could just offer a bit of context on it, Chairman. The Notting Hill Heat Network, absolutely, as Councillor Pascal said, that there've certainly been because it's a complex project, there have been moments in it. So we had to set up a company. we're actually the structure has since been simplified because the company was a grant condition and that's no longer a requirement. So that relationship with the residents is much more direct now. It's in contract, it's on site. A lot of what you see when you walk around Lancaster West is the pipework for Nottingdale Heat. The air source heat pump which provide the main source of heating will be located on the leisure centre. There was, as Pascal says, there was one of the partners of the school pulled out of the arrangement, but it is now, I would say that it is part of the overall refurbishment of Lancaster West Estate now, as you say, and that if we were going to scrutinise it, it's probably through the lens of that. So obviously Lancaster West Estate has its own project board for the refurbishment, and then there's the Housing Community Scrutiny Committee as well. I think it did get escalated here because of those specific issues around financial viability.
I think we did have a meeting at Lancaster West. Lloyd came to it as well, and did you come to it then? Yes, you did. Yeah, it was a very difficult meeting. People were very sort of annoyed and upset more than ever. And so if it's going to come into housing, if this comes into housing, it will be part of the whole of the Lancaster West development. Yeah, which we're already covering. And I mean, I don't want to say what my committee are going to do because it's up to them, but having been to that meeting, I think it is warranted because, I mean, people were very unhappy. So it will be looking at, I mean, I don't understand technical things particularly, but it will be looking at the effect it's had on the residents around that.
There's also the space, isn't it? The space, the equipment.
Yeah.
And the property
Chairman, if I
themselves.
can-
Yeah, thank you.
If I could just add, my recollection is that it came here because of its financial and structural complexity, rather than because it was as a result of Grenfell. And now it's moving into more of the implementation rather than the kind of ideation phase or whatever you might like to call it. I think that was why it was my view that it's much more sensible to go back to what would have been its home anyway, which is how.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
We'll invite you.
I think that's, unless you just disagree with that, I think we've now agreed it. Okay, fine. So that will go to housing communities. And the last one, which is social events investment and your report. Now, that's your comment on that was what importance do we want to give to this? I think in terms of our capacity.
I said my comment on everything.
The social investment annual report covers all sectors of the council spend, and therefore it should come back to this committee at some point. But the question is when.
Well, I would talk to the officers on your behalf about when the report will be ready, so it's finally.
Yeah, if you could find that
Yeah,
out.
so it's whether you want to do it is the question.
But it's been held out as a very important sector by the leadership team and their policy statement. So
Chairman, can I just say, I mean, one of our questions was, whether it's actually worth all the effort that goes into producing this report. And I think that question doesn't go away. But whether it deserves a whole paper every year is another question. Whether it could be one that's for circulation, that doesn't sort of stop the questions about whether it should be at all.
Can we ask Jackie to go back to us?
I think Callum had a question. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and just to note that next OSC in July, we've got the asset strategy coming, which sets out the broader position of the work that's happening across property. It touches on some of these areas, so you might want to take a view after that.
So you mean social investment could be taken as far worked into that?
Yeah, so it very much is part of the overarching business plan, really, if you like, of the whole property and social investment department. And so you might feel it covers.
They can go into that aspect. That's really where these are work. Yes, we talked about working something else. Yeah. Okay, that concludes the list.
Could I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Obviously, transformation runs through this and is held by this committee, but it's also coming through other departments and areas. Have you what would help me give a view or understand this more, there's a council's target operating model. Do you have a time frame for this transformation? Do you have a deadline when you want to not only recover from the cyber attack, but also have new systems transformation on there? Is there a time frame?
Yeah, so the paper that's coming on IT and digital sets out a time frame and a broad strategy is coming next month. The broader transformation, which is a whole council transformation, which is where the target operating model thinking comes through. We did 2 sessions on the target operating model, its design, its principle, in private sessions with the committee earlier this year. And there's so much change sort of being proposed to be able to sort of think through. It might be that this committee would like to do a similar session, but I'll leave that to you to determine. And then there's broader changes and processes. In terms of when we'd expect the whole target operating model to be clarified and adopted, we're working towards September, but then that's the whole programme of change will come off that through until 2030. The next few years is where we're really targeting.
So target operating model briefing to committee, where you're suggesting would be the first step?
Yeah, yes, I think it would help.
An informal briefing.
Yeah.
And I think we would like to have that as early as possible as an informal one, so that we can think about when we'd want to bring it to scrutiny.
Yes, yeah. And we can take you through the detail we've got. It's moved on a lot since the last one.
Yeah. So the decision now is to program a date for the informal briefing.
Yeah.
And in the light of that, we will bring it back to this committee for decision as to where we want to do that. Thank you very much.
And so I'm understanding that's almost like a framework for a lot of the work of this committee, is it not? The transformation. So because that's held here.
Yeah, there were 3 workshops with the last committee. There were reports and 3 workshops. So what I'll do is I'll have a look through the work programme, things done by the previous committee, but new members to the committee, because we have 3 continuing members. Just a bit of background information on what's been done before. So I'll sort that out. I've already said I'll do it for the finance reports because you're coming up to 44. I'll have a look at the other things that would be helpful to see that, because there were some recommendations to leadership team on transformation.
I think Vidamana saying also helps me with things like public participation. Culture change is at the centre of transformation as much as IT systems or AI. So I think that will help us with deciding what is included in that piece of work as much as looking at separate processes.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think that the go through the sort of analysis and then new systems, and then applying them. So then the question is, can the people, not the lead person in the department, but can everybody in the department every day, with everything they do, adopt that culture? It's that, you're absolutely right. If I could,
well, could I possibly ask for Jackie circulate those, which you just referred to, the deliberations or the workshops or whatever.
Yeah, I'm going to go. I'm going to circulate to the whole committee any information reached the work programme that's relevant on what the previous committee did. That will just, so you know what's being done, what the committee thought. You'll have your own thoughts, just bring it up to speed.
Right. Thank you, Jackie.
Really helpful. Thank you.
Right. Item 6. I do not propose to raise every MP. What I would do, everybody's read the papers. My personal surmise, thank you very much, Stuart. My personal surmise on the KDs, reading through this, I went through and tried to identify the ones that I would be interested in raising a discussion in this committee. And almost every time they were either things that had been done or had been programmed to be done in our work program. So from my personal point of view, there aren't any that I'm going to raise as KDs. We'll come around in a minute. So what I'm proposing is to ask the question, are there any particular KDs? I don't want to discuss all of them. I want to take them all as read, except for ones that people wish to raise as something that they would like, that is not already on the programme, it's not already envisaged, it's being done, but they would like to have further information on. So I'll go quickly round, if I may, Richie.
For me, Chair, was the one, sorry, third page,
What do we want to do at page?
Page 55.
Sorry, 1 second. Yes, I think it must be page 55. Page 55. I like to see around the order local authority housing fund, the last one.
That's the grant you want to see.
Yes. The last one.
So that's going to leadership team on the 10th of June. But I think the leadership team's changed. It's tomorrow. So that decision's actually going to leadership team tomorrow. So we can let you have the paper for information.
Yeah. The leadership team agenda.
That's right. It's been published as part of the agenda.
Oh, okay,
You
fine.
can
So
look up the paper on the.
yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Nothing from me, Chairman.
Oh,
Happy to agree, nothing from me.
Linda?
Yes, I'm trying to find it. It's there's one which relates to the leases. One of them being 16 Upland Square, and I just wondered whether there'd been any negotiations to be able to extend those the lease, because it's a combination of tenants and leaseholders. And I
That's on page 53. So that's on page 53, first page. And that's a published report for the leadership team tomorrow.
All right, so it's just, I mean, some of the people have lived there for 50 years, and so it's going to be very emotional. And the other thing, which is on page 83, which is local supplier support project. I don't understand. How that works and what does that mean?
Page 83.
Yeah, the bottom.
Sorry, just
Local suppliers, yes.
local supplier support project. Okay, so we can ask for more information from the officers. We can ask for a briefing note for the committee on that.
I'd quite like to know kind of how much it is, how it's applied, eligibility. Especially if you want to attract smaller businesses.
Right. Okay. We get a briefing note circulated.
Looks like that might be taken quite soon, but we'll get you a briefing note.
Nothing.
You, MT?
Yeah, I've got two, but they're for my committee, I think. I mean, the homelessness and love sleeping strategy, for 2026 to 2031, and then the temporary accommodation. But I think, do I take them in my committee?
Yeah, what happens is, the procedure is that what was agreed when we had the new committee structure was that this committee would look at the list of KDs, which is what you've got here, and then agree if they committee wants to scrutinise them here or at a select committee. So obviously that's why all the chairs of the select committees are on this.
Yeah. So if I say two caught my attention, but I think they're squarely in my committee.
So we agreed that there should be further information on both of those, and they should be allocated to your committee.
So
I mean, we have done work on both, but yes, for information, yes.
But that's one of the reasons why I raised the issue of the possible working party, because and where we are on the recommendations, because that actually does relate to that particular thing that's also about where I think it's vulnerable women in general, the use of plastic.
Yeah.
And they can't do all they
are these specifically within what's in KD?
No, that's not in the KD. I've told you, I think these KDs we probably need to look at in my committee.
You do, but that's why it's discussed here, so all the chairs are here. And
okay, but did you say, Jackie, would send me information about them?
I'll ask Bella to talk to you after this meeting. I'll say you've expressed an interest.
Okay.
And she find out when they're going to be taken, where they're going to be taken, and make some more.
Okay.
And then you can decide if you do still want to scrutinise them and how you want to do it.
Okay.
So Linda's questions, I think it's Linda to raise to you if that question that she just raised as chair of the
yes,
committees.
That is keeping the implementation. We're tracking.
Yeah.
we're tracking it, so then we have to.
Oh, because I understood the part of the was to actually look at the contract. And to track. As it was the wording of the contract
Linda,
and actually the expectation.
The question you've raised, the valid question you've raised, is that it should be on the tracker of the Housing Communities Committee.
But it depends on whether they accepted the referendum.
They didn't accept all of them, they partially accepted some.
Okay, Monica?
Most of the things that I was interested in around recovering from the cyber attack, etc., will come to us anyway.
Yeah.
There were just two which seemed to me to have financial implications. The creating an RBKC housing company, which I remember discussing in 2018, and is back on the agenda. And that would have quite large financial impact, I would think, around HRAs, etc. So, although it's coming to housing, I haven't got pages on mine.
Yeah.
Oh, it's underneath. Yes, so
Yeah, it's all into
is
the
that
chat.
69?
Yeah, it's
69.
69, it's the middle one, creating an RBKC housing company. That looks to have quite important financial implications and process. So it obviously goes to housing,
I would
but
think.
it might be something that
Well, I think if it goes
has
to
wider
housing, and
implications.
if the housing committee A want to take it on board and B want to escalate it to OSC, that's their decision to do so.
As with all
Yeah.
of these,
Yes.
but I'm just,
This
you
was
asked us to
Yeah.
say what thing might have a wider financial implication. And I think having a housing company is going to bring financial implications to this council that we may want to look at, but let's wait for it to go to housing first.
So this one says here, date for the leadership team is 26th of January 2026. Is that right? That means it's already done.
No, this is a conversation that we've had at this committee a few times. So colleagues put key decisions onto the forward plan with notice and the dates that they think the decision will be made.
So it
but
hasn't
sometimes as they're working on their projects, the dates slipped. So I have raised this several times and I have to say it's in a lot better state than it has been in the past, but it's still not perfect. So we will find out when the new date is, Monica.
Yeah.
My last question was one that should have been November 25 on page, oh dear, is that 87 or
81.
I'm trying to do very good at that without glasses. 81. Introducing a charge for acting as corporate appointee. I just wondered which committee would be looking at that. And that again seemed like a new financial approach.
Okay. Don't know much about that. So
It's only 100,000, but it's looking at raising it, and I wondered if it's a social
that's what we
benefit.
asked you.
It's adult social care.
yeah.
It's part of that.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's almost like an LPA. If you take over responsibility, you'd be charging.
And it's already part of the savings for this financial year, so we've implemented.
It's already been passed in budget, so
Then.
so it hasn't gone.
We've implemented it from the 1st of April as part of the budget.
Okay, so it's finished and done.
Finished and gone over this.
Okay.
Thank you.
And that was my.
That was your question.
Yes. So,
Right, okay.
please have it wrapped up.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Is there any other items we cover? Yes, I'd like to raise one thing which I've had under any other business, which is an email I received this afternoon at about 4 o'clock from well, basically, I've replied in the sense of recognising his he's asked for assurance about basically people making observations or being asked for evidence or whatever. I'm going to put this to officers to get a proper reply. I just wanted to record the fact that I said that I would was to raise it in this meeting today. So
What was
He's emailed all of the committee.
He's emailed all the
Find it in your emails.
In your emails, all the emails.
Basically,
The chairman is going to respond on our behalf.
Yeah.
A later response.
I
Thank you very much.
will get advice from officers and reply on your behalf, right?
And may I ask a question, will we be discussing working groups at all at the next meeting? Or at a pre-meeting? Are there any working groups that finished or are ongoing?
At the moment, we haven't established whether we wish to have a working group or anything. So you need to mention any particular working group you'd like to be considered.
Do you want to mention it?
We do that at the pre-meeting before the next one. I was just thinking, and it would need a lot of discussion, so I don't want to take time tonight. But transformation is complex.
Yes.
And across departmental, and the last thing we want to do is put more work on Callum. But it seemed to me there might be some questions under that and some objectives for impact that a working group could give more attention to, because transformation, some of us are talking process,
Monica,
some of us are talking culture.
Can I make a suggestion?
So that was the reason.
Is that we note the fact that you've raised it. We put it as a possible item on the agenda, and I think the possibility is to do with when rather than if.
Great.
But I think that basically everybody is going to want to be involved in the working group. So whether it's actually a working group or whether it's this committee,
well, it might have members from different steering groups. I thought coming together.
We've got a representation from everybody in the steering group at the moment, and I think what we need to do is to understand from Callum his early briefings on what his view of transformation is first, and we tested his scrutiny in this committee. And if out of that comes some more detail and deep dive points, we then address those in a working group as and when. But at the moment, I've got more questions about like the generic source philosophy of transformations and what the appetite of the leadership team is and the executive leadership team is with regards to transformation, because there are differing views about how radical transformation is going to be or could be, or that some people don't want it to be. But that is a resolution, I guess, Maxine, that you and Elizabeth between you have got to coordinate as a strategic statement, and then implementation of that is the next one. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
In the absence of any other.
Is any other business?
No other business. You can do urgent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
This is social. Oh, I was going to say, not another scrutiny. Which one is?
Indeed, it's.
One of those.